for supremely thorough debunking.
On Wednesday, September, Trump posts on Truth Social, wound to the neck. No further suspects have been taken into custody as of September 11th at the time of this upload. President Trump orders all American flags to be lowered to half-staff across the country until Sunday evening as a mark of respect.
For supremely thorough debunkings of GU, as well as still other videos for a highlights reel of Eric's hilarious downward spiral in dealing with the fallout, as the public has now largely realized that GU is absolutely nothing. But economics? Where has he made bold claims about his prowess with economics?
I don't think that economists understand what a price index is that measures inflation, nor do I think economists understand what a growth index or a product a quantity index is that measures GDP. I think that they don't even understand the basics of price and quantity index construction. And therefore, they can't possibly review field theoretic economics. They can't review gauge theoretic economics. They're intellectually not in a position to manage their own field.
Yeah, you heard him just fine. Economists, literally all economists, are exclusively idiots who don't understand basic economics. Eric, the not an economist with zero training in economics, understands the field much better than literally every economist in the world. And you can tell because he just said some high school level economics terms and he sounded super confident while doing so. Do you think Eric can explain to us lowly peasants what economists are missing, perhaps using obtuse analogies designed to trick us into thinking he knows what he's talking about?
Let me explain what they don't understand to begin with.
Sure.
Imagine that all prices and all quantities of output are the same at the end of a year as they are at the beginning. And you ask, what happened during that year? Was there inflation? They meandered over the course of the year, but miraculously, they all came back to exactly their values. The amount produced at the end of the year is the same as at the beginning in every single quantity. Typically, the claim would be that the price index should be 1.0 and that the quantity index should be 1.0. That's clearly wrong.
Why?
Well, it's much easier to see with, it speaks to a fundamental confusion that economists have. They don't understand that the economy is curved and not flat.
Yeah, bro, the economy is curved and not flat. This is just like when Terrence Howard told us that there are no straight lines. Pretty deep shit, huh? Anyway, we could listen to Eric flap his lip for quite some time, but instead, let's get to the meat of it. As you likely recall, Eric spends most of his time whining about how nobody in academia will acknowledge his revolutionary work. But he also sometimes brags about how he gives super awesome talks for academics all over the world all the time, because his work is so smart and awesome, and since those two narratives totally go together. One of those was the Perimeter Institute talk that we discussed in the video with Christian Furco, where we learned that he's a buffoon who was forbidden from telling anyone that he had been there. But Christian also said this.
So he also visited my alma mater for my PhD, the University of Chicago, in 2021, I believe, shortly after I graduated. And I also don't really know what the story is with that visit.
Ooh, I know the story. Want to hear that story? Okay, let's go. On November 10th, 2021, Eric held a seminar at the Economics Department at the University of Chicago, one of the best economic departments in the world, with a high concentration of Nobel laureates. Apparently, the news of the seminar traveled a bit, since Eric talked down to a rather intelligent and reputable crowd there. He presented something he wrote with his wife, Pia Milani, and which follows up on the second chapter of Pia Milani's 1996 PhD thesis, which they co-wrote. Yes, Eric helped his wife write her doctoral thesis. It's hard to wrap your head around whether that's a worse look for her or for him, but do with that information what you will. Anyway, in this talk, Eric explained how, and I quote, all of economics is based on the wrong version of differential calculus. The reactions were not very positive. One person in attendance described it as follows. The main focus of his talk was a criticism of how the Consumer Price Index, CPI, is calculated. He suggested that if only economists would abandon their bad differential calculus, and if they were to adopt his good differential calculus, they would replace the current CPI with his version of it, and that would make the world a much better place. Given that his audience were actual experts, they had plenty of questions. In response, Eric was evasive, condescending, and when asked repeatedly to actually illustrate his alternative for the CPI with a simple example, he just kept backpedaling and making excuses, saying things like, "I'm not trying to be a dick." Unfortunately, no footage exists of this lustrous sermon on the Mount, but somebody was live tweeting it, so we can still get a sense of what happened. Some unwarranted condescension from Eric, some very warranted skepticism from the audience, smart people correcting a dumb thing Eric said, the aforementioned dick comment, the smart people not taking Eric's condescending bullshit, weird race stuff, another huge dollop of unwarranted condescension, the smart people asking him to get to the fucking point, where's the goddamn formula, and some patented Weinstein word salad. In just a bit, we will discuss Eric's garbage claims with Matthijs van Wielen, a professor of economics at the University of Amsterdam. But let's run through the basics first, so that everyone will be primed for the discussion with Matthijs. Now, unlike Geometric Unity, which anyone can download and laugh at, his economics paper, An Extension of Intertemporal Ordinal Welfare to Changing Tastes, Economics as Gauge Theory, is difficult to track down. University of Chicago pages that used to display it now just show errors, like this one and also this one. Luckily, the Wayback Machine has come to the rescue, as it often does. As you can see, it's only 11 pages, and most of those 11 pages are fluff. After a very brief abstract, for some reason there's a table of contents, since 11-page pamphlets typically need one of those, followed by 2 long quotes, a few pages of math that never gets applied to anything, and 2 pages of references. Take away the narrow margins, and it's about 2 pages of meat, if you're inclined to call it that. Pia's doctoral thesis is also difficult to find, but not impossible, so here is that as well. Since this one is quite long and their newer paper is the focus here, to save time we can simply point out that the thesis is essentially irrelevant, having only 2 citations, and therefore in no way the revolutionary document Eric regularly pretends. Now, between the talk and the paper, here's the thing about Eric and Pia's garbage assertions. Apart from their solution being totally ill-defined and difficult to pin down, there is an important reason why they absolutely can't be correct in their claim. In fact, Matthijs formulated and proved an impossibility result, which shows that the solution they suggest their approach provides simply does not exist. This result is not fringe. It is published in Econometrica, an important econometrics journal. One of the other papers on the topic that he wrote together with Roy Vanderweide was in the American Economic Review. These journals are the nature and science of economics, just to convey to you how not at all fringe these results are. And there are other papers that relate to this result and corroborate it. Once again, to be perfectly clear, these economists have published results that serve as mathematical proof that the solution Eric claims to have found does not exist. All attempts by scholars to politely convey this information to Eric have been met with total silence. Shocking, I know. Since Eric cares more about status than truth, that leaves it to people like me to inform the public about what's going on and how anyone can arrive at the conclusion that Eric's claims regarding economics are just as flimsy as his claims regarding physics. And we will get to that right after introducing today's sponsor. As you know, I expose all kinds of frauds and charlatans, and some of them are batshit. Use code security numbers can market. Now back to the debunking. Now getting back to Eric, it's important to refresh our memories about some of the wild claims he's made about this revolutionary work he and his wife have bestowed upon the world, as it's good for context while we show how vacuous it really is.
Pia Milani's thesis revolutionized all of economic theory, and it hasn't been understood. If you want to do something revolutionary, I promise you that that's been it's an arbitrage. I can share it with the world. Nobody will do anything with it because the world decided to stand in the way of that progress. That's an incontrovertible fact to me.
Yes, the whole world is conspiring against his wife because reasons, just like they do to Eric and to his baby brother Brett as well. All the while, the Robin to Eric's Batman, Brian Keating, nods along like the pointless buffoon that he is. Just to be clear, I'm comparing them to Adam West and Burt Ward from 1960s Batman, not actual badass superheroes. I don't want there to be any confusion.
Was that the Boskin Commission in 1996 tried to figure out how to cut Social Security and raise taxes without getting caught, because that's the third rail of politics. And what they said is, if we change the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, the way we measure inflation, because tax brackets are indexed and because entitlement payments for Social Security and Medicare are indexed. If we claim that if we claim that inflation is overstated by 1.1 percentage points, we will gain $1 trillion in savings.
Frauds in America love to tie their conspiracies to the U.S. government, always failing to explain why academics in literally every other country ignore their work as well. But logical consistency is never their strong suit, especially when he contradicts himself at every turn.
If you look up gauge theory and an intuitive way to understand gauge theory, something like that, you'll come up with this really brilliant economic analogy that sounds like, Eric is copied from Juan Maldacena. This is Eric's work. This gauge theory applied to economic transactions. Eric and Pia Milani. Yep, Pia Milani, of course.
Juan knew that he had gotten this. He knew about Pia Milani.
So Pia's work was buried, never to see the light of day, but then also stolen and subsequently published. That checks out. Anyway, this is all right in line with what we've come to expect from Eric. Very light on the actual academics, heavy on the conspiracies and persecution complex. Why bother actually explaining economics when all you really want is the conspiratorial rhetoric and resulting cult following? Unfortunately for Eric, just like how physicists eventually did read geometric unity, even though he tried so hard to hide from them, the same can be said for his claims regarding economics. And it will come as no surprise that Eric and his wife did not, in fact, revolutionize the field. Now, if you'll recall, we did a little bit of debunking Eric's economics as gauge theory bullshit with Tim Wynn, right after his debunk of GU, given that he wrote a paper in response to the economics paper as well, this time without the anonymous co-author that Eric used as an excuse to ignore Tim before. Do you think Eric paid attention this time with only Tim's name on there? Of course not. Anyway, Tim's presentation focused on some trivial mathematical errors from Eric, since Tim is a mathematician, but it's time to get more thorough with it by speaking with an economist. As we mentioned, Eric's rhetoric about inflation is disproven by something called an impossibility result, as formulated in 2002 by Matthijs van Wielen. The result he proved is called the apples and oranges theorem. In order to explain this result and why it implies that Eric's claim can't be true, we have to explain what this whole index number problem is that Pia and Eric claim to have cracked. To start, there are two numbers which are perhaps the most important numbers in economics. The first is economic growth, or the increase in the amount of goods and services produced per capita over time. This is measured by a country's real GDP, or gross domestic product. This has to account for the second important number, inflation. This is the sustained increase in the prices of goods and services, leading to a general decrease in the purchasing power of money over time. But the prices of things don't increase uniformly, so it's not trivial to calculate. This increase is measured by something called a price index, typically a consumer price index or CPI. In order to address these concepts, economists use something called a utility function. This is a formula that describes how much someone likes certain goods or services. With these, we can then also generate indifference curves. These are contour lines which indicate the combinations of products that consumers value equally as much. Given that these curves are continuous, they are differentiable, where derivatives give us rates of change, as you may recall from the first few lessons of calculus. So the straight lines tell us what consumers can afford, and the curves tell us what consumers like. If you know someone's utility function, then you can decide to define economic growth accordingly, but we typically don't just magically know this. What we may have, however, is data on what people buy and the prices against which they do this. That may allow us to infer, from their behavior as consumers, what their utility function looks like. If we can do that, then we can define real growth accordingly. There is one more complication, and it's the part that Eric claims to have solved. Sometimes the data are inherently inconsistent with the idea that what someone likes and dislikes is constant, and that the only reason why the consumption patterns change is that the person adjusts what they buy in response to changes in their budget and the prices of the goods. Tastes change. Populations change. In technical terms, it can be that our data violate what economists call the generalized axiom of revealed preference, or GARP. And if this is violated, you simply can't reconstruct a utility function that would be consistent with all the choices of a consumer at once. So assuming stable preferences, or the same utility function for everyone, may be a problem, especially if the data you gather in an effort to reconstruct this utility function tell you that this is impossible.